Are you ready to scale and outsource your business?
Okay, let's go.
Welcome to the Outsourcing and Scaling Show. I'm your host, Nathan Hirsch, a show where we talk about everything Amazon, Shopify, e-commerce, and digital marketing. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Outsourcing and Scaling Show. Today I've got a special guest, Omari Broussard. Omari, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Nathan. How are you?
Doing great. So a little bit about you. You started your first business at the age of 9, cutting grass for neighbors. At the age of 17, you joined the U.S. Navy. We thank you for your service. He retired after 21.5 years of honorable service as Chief Petty Officer in 2015. His journey into marketing started back in 2012 when he started his defensive firearms training company, 10X Defense, which we'll talk all about. His unique approach to marketing caught attention of a number of small business owners, which spawned his consulting firm, 10X Strategies Consulting. Omari's firm consults business owners on leveraging online and offline marketing strategies and tactics to achieve their financial goals. He's also co-founded 2 companies, Dude Agencies with Chris, who we were also having on the podcast, and Leveraged Influence. Omari, that's a lot. I'm excited to talk to you. Before we talk about all of that, why don't we take a gigantic step back? Talk to me a little bit of what you were like growing up. I know you started a business when you were 9. Were you also a straight A student? Were you a rebel? Did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Man, I would have to say that I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. My upbringing, I was raised by a single mom, me and my little brother. And I grew up in Southeast San Diego. I'm originally from San Diego. We grew up I was born in the mid 70s. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So in my neighborhood, you can imagine, drugs and gang violence was pretty heavy as I was growing up, actually at pretty much its height. So school wasn't really a thing unless you were going to be an athlete or you were going to be a scholar. And I was neither. So, and I knew by the age of 13, I was going to join the Navy, but my plan was, go to the Navy and become a Navy SEAL, which I wasn't able to do. But, my other plan was, hey, when it's all said and done, I want to be an entrepreneur. So that was, ever since the early days.
I want to ask you about that because in my mind, joining the Navy or the Army or the Air Force could not be farther away from being an entrepreneur, where you have like that flexibility, the freedom, you're creative, where in the Navy, you're following orders, you're following instructions, you're a yes man, so to speak. How do you bridge the gap there? Like what's going through your head thinking, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I want to put myself in that position too?
Yeah. So actually, it's a crazy story because my best friend, one of my best friends that I grew up with, he just visited me last week. He's been in the Navy for, I think he'll do 30 years total. And it was because he did a book report in the 7th grade, which made me go, I want to join the Navy. So he did a book report on a book called Men with Green Faces. It was one of the first books about Navy SEALs in war. It was Navy SEALs in Vietnam. And he did a book report and I was like, whatever that is, I want to do that. So I pretty much dedicated my life from the age of 13 all the way till joined at 17. I didn't go to SEAL training until about 5 years in the Navy. So, at that time, I was going to get out since I wasn't able to complete training due to medical issues. But I have another best friend who I grew up with since the 3rd grade, and he was a Navy SEAL. He was the one that told me to stay in, right? So although, the military would be on the complete opposite spectrum of being an entrepreneur,
right?
I believe I learned, I did an interview with Business Insider, and what I told them was I was conditioned for the adversity of business through my 20 years in the Navy. What I had to learn in order to make that transition was just get some specialized knowledge in the business world. But the conditioning that I went through, systems, operations, management, leading, working when you don't have a clock, not doing a regular 9 to 5, being able to work 3 days straight with no sleep. Like that's entrepreneurship. So, it was a great training ground, although, for 20 years, it took up every year of my adult life.
And you have a lot of accomplishments too. I mean, I'm reading here a bachelor's of science in organizational security management, bachelor of arts in performance psychology, and an MBA with a concentration on marketing. There's a lot of people out there today that are saying, don't get a college degree, focus on starting a business. And you've obviously done that, plus the Navy experience there too. What would you tell to those people?
Yeah. So my bachelor's of science happened in the military because I was told very early on, you can't take anything away from you or with you from the military other than an education, right? What your experiences are and actually getting an education. So I got my education while I was in. My master's in performance psychology I got after I retired. So I did back-to-back master's programs. So I did a master's in performance psychology because I had been teaching, coaching, and training for years as a firearms instructor while I was in the Navy. I ran a CrossFit gym while I was in the Navy. I did a lot of entrepreneurial things while I was in the Navy. When you get out of the military, they give you the GI Bill, right? So it gives you money to go get formal education. And the only reason why I got 2 master's degrees was I promised my grandmother I would not waste that money, right? That was an obligation I made to my grandmother because I'm the first male in my family to have not just 1 college degree, let alone 3.
Right.
So it was more of a personal thing. Now, what I would tell other people is like education has changed today. Now that I've gone through it, I have a different perspective because there's a lot of people that don't go through it and then they give their opinion. Now that I've been bachelor's, 2 master's degrees, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's enough self-education available today, because when I went through my MBA with a concentration in marketing, I was damn near teaching the marketing class because I've been doing marketing for 5 years in the real world with real businesses. So I think it's just where you want to go. If you want to be a professor, right? If you want to be a researcher, if you want to be a doctor, you got to go to college. If you want to be a business owner, you don't necessarily have to. But if you want to be a manager in a business, right? If you want to be a COO, if you want to be a VP of whatever, then yeah, a company might require academics. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's just, we haven't made that shift yet.
I totally get it. So talk to me about marketing, because what year did you get into marketing and how has it kind of changed and evolved, and how did you kind of learn it and get off the ground?
Oh man, this is crazy. So back when I started 10X Defense, which was my firearms training company, still runs over on the West Coast. It was 2011. I had been teaching off and on and doing some contracting outside the military for firearms training since 2007. So 5 years I was like, okay, now I'm going to make my run out into the real world. Right. So I went and my buddy was like, man, you got to learn marketing. I was like, learn marketing. He was like, yeah. So of course I went to a 2-day event held by a guy named Lloyd Irvin. Lloyd Irvin, I call him like my godfather of marketing because without him, I wouldn't even be here. So I went to his 2-day event, but even though I got so much information about it, I still didn't pay attention like I should have. So I had a course scheduled in Nevada, right? I lived in San Diego, 6-hour drive, dead of summer, 100 degrees. I get out there and the range is empty. Nobody showed up. It was at that moment that I realized, like, not only do I need to do this marketing, I need to master it, because if I can't get people to show up, we're done before we even start. So I started looking up, got involved in a local, what was used to be called GKIC, which is now No BS Inner Circle with Dan Kennedy. And I wrote my first piece of copy after the first website that I built in 2012. And since then, I tell people, like, marketing is not my life, it's my lifestyle every day. It's all I do. So it has been huge for me, huge shift in my, not only professional life, but my personal life as well, as far as my trajectory.
Nice. It makes a ton of sense. Talk to me about your first business. What did year one look like? Because I feel like that's where a lot of entrepreneurs achieve success or they fail, because year one is so hard. What was your starting point? How did you get it off the ground?
I did a podcast with my boys, Matt Wolf and Joe Fear, and I call it Start With Who You Know. So that's what I did. I started off my first business. Let's say 10X Defense was my first business. I started teaching for free, right? And I would do classes for free. And then the people that went to those classes, they would talk about it, right? Or I would get their testimonials and I would share the video that I took at the courses. I would share, Facebook at the time was a little bit more lenient on firearms training on the platform. So I was able to do a couple ads, and, I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot of blogs. I wrote for Personal Defense Network, which is, an authority resource in the space. So I just did that grassroots, my first marketing coach, Henry Evans, told me that marketing is blue collar work, right? So I just got in the trenches. So that first year is a grind, but I got to tell you, the second year and the third year, because of the work that I did in the first year and the patience that I had, the second and third year were a lot easier, because by then people started knowing my name. In fact, people that didn't come to my courses or didn't do business with me the first year, they did business with me the second year, because I think a lot of people want to see if you as a business, if you're going to be around. That's part of the equation. Can you last? Right. I don't want to buy something from you this year and then next year you disappear, right? So that's what I would say. It was a grind, but it was that foundation, the content that I wrote, the podcast interviews that I did, the videos that I shot, the articles I even wrote for a buddy of mine is a real estate agent. He did a newsletter. So I would write home safety tips for his newsletter. Right. So I just, anywhere I can put out information and meet people and give value, and then collect the success stories to let them tell my story versus me telling my story. That was key. Last thing is connections. Right. I didn't do it by myself. My mentor at the time was putting me on all the connections I made with other instructors across the country. We were collaborating, doing stuff together. So I would say that strategic partnerships and alliances is the other key, which I'm learning more and more so now than ever. But that was that first year.
Makes a ton of sense. Talk to me about your first hire, because I know that's an experience for everyone. Who was it? How did it go?
Yeah. So my first hire, I hired a VA out of the Philippines. And it went well as far as we were able to get some things done, but I did not understand the hiring process and what I needed to do. Right. I think getting somebody to raise their hand and work for you is great, but if you don't have systems and documentation and processes in place for them to execute on, there's always going to be this struggle. Right. You're always going to be looking at like, damn, I wish they would do this. Well, that's your fault. Right. You as the business owner, the buck stops with you. So if you don't have the systems and processes in place to facilitate their work, you're done. You're going to be frustrated. So, of course, I didn't really learn that now. We have a bigger, in my companies, we have bigger teams, but it was a hard lesson. But that first hire, getting somebody was, relatively easy. Here's what I want done. It was because you always run into, do I have enough work? Right. That was a big thing for me. But if I would have had systems and processes in place, that would have been a non-issue, because I would have just been like, oh, just do this checklist every day. I can kind of forecast out what the work's going to be based off what's required to accomplish the process.
Right. Yeah, man, I love it. Talk to me about what you look for when you're hiring people now, because you've obviously hired a lot of people like me. Yeah. You've probably learned from the bad hires, and I do want to hear your horror story next. But before we jump into that, what do you look for now? Let's say you're looking to build a team right now. What traits do you look for?
Well, we're in that process now, and we're kind of different. I took some of my military background and kind of brought it in, which I tend to do a lot since that's most of my life. Now, our last, I want to say one of them, one of my interns has sent for me. I like the apprentice model, right? So I'll look for somebody, they're young, they're hungry, they have a talent. I'm like, look, come on board with me as an intern for 90 days. And within that 90-day period, I'm going to find out if they're going to be worth paying or not. Right. So through that 90 days, it's not just me just like, oh, go get my coffee. It's like, no, I'm putting them through training. Right. So let's talk about Oyuki. Oyuki's in TJ. She actually works out of Chris's office. I brought her on because I needed somebody to help manage my chaos from an operational strategic standpoint. Now, I knew she had experience in managing and creating systems and stuff. Right. But she had no idea about marketing. Right. So I said, OK. 90 days, I trained her in all the big picture things, right? So I'm a DM, digital marketer certified partner. So I gave her all the relevant certifications. She went through the training and did practicals. And then she watched me actually build a couple of marketing funnels from end to end. She was involved in the project management of that. And then like the last couple weeks, it was more, I was giving her more challenging items to do to see how she would respond. On the 90th day, before the 90th day, I already knew I was going to pay her. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I love it. I mean, but do you feel like that limits you at all? Because you're really hiring people that you can teach. Do you ever hire people that are more high level, that are maybe bringing skills to the table that you don't have? Or are you much more of, I have a system, I have a process, I need to hire people that can follow it?
Yeah, good question. So I'm a big Jay Abraham fan, and I read one of his articles. It says 2 ways you can build a team. You can train them from the ground up, or you can hire A players. And a lot of it's going to depend where your business is. Right. So at this stage, like with leveraged influence and the consulting company, I've learned a lot of lessons. So there's going to be, I find myself partnering with experts, right? So good case study here. One of my best friends runs an e-commerce store. He contacted me. He's like, hey, man, I need a rebrand. I got to rebuild this thing. I'm like, cool. Looked at the scope of work. I'm like, I tapped into my network and said, hey, who's the e-commerce? Right. One of my partners, Jeff Ross out of Australia. He's like, I got you. I got the e-commerce thing. That's what we do. Cool. Partnered up with Jeff. Done deal. Done. Right. So I think it's right. Like I said, I'm running a more of a hybrid model, and I like partnerships with experts because, the company that we're running now is not, it's just not at that point yet to where we can, bring on an A player and hire him top dollar. Right. But I find that I get a little bit more leeway as I partner with experts, right? And then the people that I bring on and train, because we're getting better at creating systems, we're compressing that apprenticeship time, right? So what was 90 days now may end up only being 30 as we build this out. So I think with technology and the way things are, like there's no, like in my experience, there's no one formula. It's kind of you take from different formulas and then kind of come up with your own. But I think as you level up, right? Once we break the 7-8 figure mark, it's going to change, right? What we start with now is not what we're going to end up with. So I'm not against hiring A players. It's just in my experience, I've been partnering with A players because the thing about A players is they're A players for a reason. And from my experience, they probably kind of, because of the way things are now, they're probably already thinking of being on their own.
Makes sense. So do you have a horror story, any hiring story that went terribly wrong that you can share with the audience and what you learned from it?
Yeah. So, and this may not be, horror story is relative, but for me at this point, it was, hiring, it was a couple years back, it was, heck, I don't even remember, but I wanted an executive assistant. It's not the one that I have now, but it was one that I had before. And I had put all this time into like, okay, onboarding, here's what we're going to do, and I'm thinking, all right, my calendar is going to ease up. I'm going to be able to focus on, and that person just went dark, just dark, no response, no, nothing, no. And I'm just like, I just put, 3 weeks into getting everything settled. And now there's nothing there. So I went through all this process and now I'm like by myself again. Right. So that's been my biggest one. So now, and that's what kind of led me into kind of testing this apprentice model, kind of testing people out, right. Or putting certain, extending the hiring process. So when I do hire, they're going to be there. Right.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. We've all had someone disappeared. I hired a developer back in the day, and we had planned out this entire project, and day one we were supposed to start it, and he just disappeared and never heard from him again. And that was one of my craziest stories.
What happened? What went wrong? That was my big question. Like, what went wrong? What did I do?
I think I had a Facebook post the other day, something along the lines of, if you could think of like your worst hire and you could ask one question and get an answer, what would it be? And that would be my question. It was like, What happened?
Yeah, no doubt.
So talk to me a little bit more about where you're at today, what you're working on, and tell the audience how they can hear more about you.
Yeah. So right now, of course, my partner, Chris Martinez, which you'll have on the show. That's my boy, man. That's going to be a good show. Dude Agency, which is an outsourcing agency for digital marketing agencies. So, kind of involved in that. And then leveraged influence is kind of new. We just started it. Me and my partner, Andrew O'Brien, he was in the PR space. So we came up with a business that takes what I believe is the heavy lifting out of PR, which is the research and the pitching. So we actually have a service where our team will do the research for the media outlets, and we will do the pitch and make the connection. And once the connection's made, we connect the media outlet with the business owner, and we let them take it from there. So we started that from me and Andrew in January, and now we have a team of like 6 now. Oh, I lose count sometimes, 6 or 7. So I'm working on that. And then my consulting firm, I'm actually about to change the name, but I'm really heavy into marketing consulting from a strategic level because I believe, there's so many marketing tactics you could do, but if they don't fit within one framework, right, one clear framework, you're just going to, bury yourself in the chaos of MarTech and tactics. So that's what I'm working on now. Speaking more. So I'm speaking at the Small Business Festival here in Austin next week. So I'll be on the road more and really just connecting, getting my mentor advisory board down, connecting with other people. Cause I think that's going to be very huge for every business to have connections across the globe, to get things done. People can find me on Facebook. I have my public profile, Omari Broussard. Is where I live. You can always reach out to me there through Messenger. And I'm down to help, people have questions.
Mari, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch.
Appreciate you, Nathan. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. Did you enjoy this content? If so, click like, leave us a comment, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you great content all about hiring.